said that Matthews killed 36 people only in the United States.
Matthew? Hurricane? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and yeah, most of them were in North Carolina, I think.
Yeah.
And Haiti, I think, lost a lot more than the United States.
Ah, yeah.
Haiti lost, I don't know, a couple hundred in this, something. They had lost a lot of people. Yeah, it wasn't good. Okay, how did yesterday go? With your discussions? Good?
Actually, I think everybody said something.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody kind of took turns.
But over there, I think instead Rodrigo's Jose.
I'm sorry, did Rodrigo come?
Yeah, no, it's Jose. Instead of Rodrigo.
It's Jose?
It's Jose, right?
It's Jose.
I don't know because Luis was taking notes.
Jose.
Yeah, Jose.
Okay, why did they put Rodrigo? So this is Jose. Okay.
We don't know what happened with Rodrigo.
Yeah, I think he had a lot of stuff going on this semester. Okay, let me just take a look here. Did everybody get, so is this everyone who shared a reflection?
Mm-hmm.
And was there anybody missing to share from yesterday?
No.
Luis, Jose, did Manuel? Yeah, Manuel's there. Jaime, was that everybody from yesterday? Okay. Okay. So maybe Ramon, if you could you discuss? So you mentioned here a small project.
Yeah.
All right, and you present a problem. Do you present a problem, or do they define the problem?
Two things, because I present an open problem in general terms, but they need to reformulate the problem.
Okay.
But the idea it was that they need to and they need to choose each group choose a different way to solve the same problem, because normally this kind of problems don't have one solution only. You can solve it, or you can solve from different strategies or different implementations of solutions.
So, for me, when I think about this idea of problem solving,
Yeah.
and you've kind of talked about all of these just now, there are three, I look at it in three different ways. The students can problem set, that is, for me, problem setting is the same as reformulating,
Yeah.
kind of reformulating the problem. Like, reformulating the problem would be, you would give a problem, and then they would generate a different problem based on that. It would be related to changing the problem. Okay. But for me, problem setting from a very general standpoint would be just creating what is the problem. Okay, so problem setting or problem reformulation. Okay. Now the second is the process for solving the problem, so that could be different things for different groups. And then the third would be you could actually have different solutions depending on the idea, right? I mean, maybe there's one, some are better than others, but you could have different solutions. So given those three aspects, problem set, the process, process of solving the problem, and then accepting or dealing with different solutions, how would you describe this particular activity that you had in mind in terms of those three?
You asked about the description of the activities that I need to
If
do.
what I'd like is if you could, let me highlight these here. These three, when I think about problem-based learning, basically is what we're talking about, problem-based learning. We can look at these three areas. Now you might say, no, it's only, you decide what each of these three would look like. But what I'm curious about is this problem, this situation, this activity that you're sharing, if you could describe it in terms of, okay, do students set the problem, or do you as the instructor set the problem? The process of the solution, the process for solving a problem, are there different ways? Are you going to let them decide, or do you decide? It's more like this, who's making the decisions? And then the possible solution, are you looking or expecting one solution, or are they able to explore different solutions depending? That's kind of what I'm curious about, and what I mean by explaining this activity in terms of those three: problem setting, process for solving the problem, and possible solutions. And again, maybe there's no possible solutions, maybe there's one solution, but that's what I'm curious about in this particular activity that you're thinking about.
Okay, the first thing, I think that problem setting is the when you give a problem, you don't have sometimes you don't have all the information that you need in order to solve or to understand the problem, and they need to discuss what kind of conditions or what kind of particular context or what kind of assumptions they need to do in order to visualize a possible solution. But after this process of problem setting or reformulation, we discuss in classroom different ways to solve this problem. For example, I put the example of concentrating orange juice. You can concentrate orange juice. We can identify for literature, for previous experience, or for market commercial process different ways of do this process, and we identify 4 or 5 different ways, and they choose each group or each team choose a different possibility of to do the same process.
All right, so let's back up just a little bit. So concentrating orange juice or
Yeah.
orange juice concentrate. What in this case? What's the problem or possible problems behind this topic of concentrating orange juice?
Yeah, you can build different systems, configure different process in order to arrive to the final concentration that you desire. For example, in the market you can find concentrate used to 75% of solids, and raw use normally have about 10%, and you need to go to 75 in order to enter to the market. But you can do this process with different systems.
All right, so before we get to the process,
Yeah.
how would you finish the following sentence? The problem is, and say something about
Yeah.
orange concentrated orange juice. The problem is,
The problem is to produce orange juice to a final fixed concentration of solids, 75%. That is the problem for, in general, for all the teams.
but is I guess my question is, like, when I think of a problem, I feel like there's some sort of conflict, so there's something negative going on. I don't mean to say like
Yeah.
problem like an activity, if that is what we're talking about. So when we're talking about problem-based learning, I think it's interesting that we're talking about and thinking about problem-based learning, because it's a very useful approach, right, in our classrooms. But the idea with the problem-based approach is that we formulate or we set a problem that is some sort of conflict or misunderstanding or something negative, right? That they say, oh wow, this is bad. I need to try to come up with some possible solutions, right, to this negative phenomenon.
But in this particular context, the problem is that any of the solutions have some cost, and you need to evaluate the efficiency, the performance of the process.
Okay, so let me ask another question.
Yeah.
So if the solutions have a possible cost associated to it, then do you want to explore or reveal the problem before they discuss or look for a solution, or do you want to investigate the solution to the situation and then link it back to, well, okay, this is bad, there's a problem with the solution? In this case, which of those two options do you think would be most appropriate for this activity, for this group?
The idea is that after they work, each team one kind of solution, and the solution is in terms of performance, the idea is that after final activities to contrast the the different solutions in terms of cost or performance to give to answer what could be the most the most interesting solution, because you have two aspects. You have the cost, but you have the technical and cost for implementing the solution. Because normally, if you want a process with more a system with more performance, you need to invest more.
Okay.
And then you need to compare the technical and investment with versus performance, and to give a final recommendation or to take a final decision.
Okay, so maybe the problem, it seems, when you talk about...
It's a decision-making process.
Right, but for getting back to the problem, because this is the very first item here, right,
Yeah.
that we're thinking about. Tell me if this is a possibility. Like, we could state the problem as being making concentrated orange juice can be expensive if the...
Well, I want to explain a little bit. There is the most simple way to concentrate. You put on a vessel, you heat the vessel, and you move maybe in order to that the product don't how do you say, don't stick or don't,
Is the shape?
on the vessel, and water go away and you concentrate.
Okay.
It is a common or the most easy way to do that. But what are the consequences? Because you destroy color, you destroy vitamins, you destroy, and it's a very large cost process in time and in energy consumption, because all the energy go to the environment. And you can do that if you want to arrive to a final solution to concentrate the juice. The problem is solved.
Okay, let me stop you there. You had just described a problem.
Yeah.
Okay, now, you just described the problem. Now, what I'm asking us to think about is, and I'm thinking about your class, your group. You want them to understand the problem that you just described, right?
Yeah.
All right. Now, the question is, how do you want them to understand? How do you want them to come to understand that problem? Okay, and this is just a hypothetical question, right? But this is what I want you to think about. How do you want them to come to understand the problem that you just described? Because this is the very first step. Forget about the process of finding a solution and all this. You want that problem in some way to be so clear at the end of this activity that it's okay, if I do it this way, I'm going to lose nutrients, vitamins. If I do it this way, it's going to be very expensive. That's a problem. Okay, but this is what I'm getting at, is how do you want them to come to understand, and then how can you share that explanation with colleagues about this problem? Now, this problem, you can explain the problem to them, right? Or you can have them through the process explore, reveal, right? They're on a quest, right? It's like they don't know what they're doing, they're just doing something, and it's all of a sudden, oh wow, look at that. I just did this, and now I've lost all the vitamins. Or this, wow, I didn't realize this is really expensive. Right? So that's kind of what this activity, this sharing, this reflection is about, is how can you share with us, how would you want them to understand this problem, and first, and what is the problem, even more specifically. This is the first step: problem setting, or reformulating the problem. And in this case, it seems very basically two problems that I see based on what you're talking about. You tell me if I'm on the right track. One is cost, and the second is nutrition.
Quality.
Or quality, taste, maybe another's taste, you know, nutrient value, the way it feels in your mouth or whatever, right? So these are the problems here that are being, it sounds like that are being revealed here. So that's a decision you'll need to make, is problem set. Do you want your students to set the problem, or are you as the instructor going to say, okay, here's the problem?
We discussed in a general, in the first session of this activity, because it's about 1 month activity. And this, the first, we discussed this sample because it's anyone has some previous experience about that. And we identify the two big aspects: energetic cost, energy, and quality. And the question is what we can do in order to avoid or minimize these two aspects. And
right.
they are going to research to study or in order to identify other possibilities to do the same process, or to arrive to the same end, but with different process that could be less quality effects or less cost, or what. And normally, I have them and some. We can identify at least 5 or 6 different processes that we can do to minimize these aspects. And
to minimize the problems.
To minimize the problem. To minimize to solve the problem, but
but to solve the problem is to minimize. To solve the problem is to minimize the problem, right? Because maybe we don't solve the problem completely, or maybe we do. I don't know. Sometimes it's a gray area about working towards a problem, because we never solve. Maybe in some types of problems, we really never solve the problem. It's just we work towards the problem.
It's the best solution.
I don't know if you
right.
It's not. I don't know that it's the exact term to solve the problem, because we can solve the problem with all the ways. It depends on the context.
Depends on the problem.
It depends on the setting.
On the problem. And this, I keep going back to the problem, and this is what I want you to be really clear about in this particular case, because I'm assuming that, let's say nutrition is a problem. All right. Probably when you get into the specifics, and you would know this better than I would, but there's probably smaller problems, like, okay, the problem of conserving vitamin A versus vitamin C, or you can break down those problems even greater. So the point I'm trying to make here is that for your students, it seems to me that they need to be very specific in the problem. Of course the process, of course possible solutions, but what's the relationship between the process and the solutions, and going back to the original problem that they see?
Let me just explain.
Okay.
I think the problem is that in order to arrive to a solution, you need to analyze what is your financial power or capacity or possibility, because if you don't have enough money, the best solution is maybe the worst solution, but it's the best because you don't have another possibility. And the other is that what is the consumer the consumer if people buy your products, it's not problem with quality because for them that's a good quality. I think like a friend go to China in 2008 when the Olympic Games took place, and they visited different places, different touristic developments in China, and they say, "Wow, it's good." And he asked to a Chinese. But Mexico, we have the idea that China products don't have quality. And the people answer, Mexico bought bad quality. That is because that we sell bad products. Because the market is a factor. Then, when I talk about quality, is a discussion term. Quality is not a fixed thing. Quality changes for different places, for different times. Some years ago, some things were good quality, and today we don't accept it. The idea is to exercise different solutions to evaluate some criteria like investment and quality and performance, and to compare, to contrast, and to take a final decision.
So they have to have information about the scenario where they are planning to develop the product.
That's right.
That's
maybe after listen the question, maybe we have to start by posting the question like, okay, if you got these restrictions, this constriction about the budget, but the problem is you have to not choose a solution. I thinking you have to design, create, improve the process of getting this use in order to lower the cost, but keeping the quality. So maybe the students are free to choose maybe, okay, we are going to look for some drawbacks about the process, or changing the levels of the factors that are impacting in the process. Maybe I don't know if this.
I think
Go ahead.
I think that's according to the situation that you plan. They have to maybe decide, as you said, maybe identify what would be the best way to do it. So, but the problem, you have to fix it, or they have to get to fix it. I mean, they have to know where they are going. I think that's the main point of your discussion.
Yeah, but there are two kinds of problems because one of them is for the investor, for the decision making. And here is the problem that the engineer, like an engineer, you study the problem, you set your condition, your assumption, but you define different scenario, different possibilities, and you solve and you present just like a product. If you buy the product that you want, you say if you choose this scenario, you need to invest some amount, and you need to, and you are going to retake your investment in 3 years, 5 years, I don't know, and you take the decision because you have the money, the bank or the investor, and that is not my problem in academic. In academic engineering course, that is the problem of project or financial. Okay. But here, my problem is more technical. I need to know how to solve different possibilities and compare in order to contrast the solutions and to have some idea of what that means one solution and another solution.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's no doubt in my mind you, the instructor, can identify the problem.
Yeah.
Okay, that is clear.
But the students is the challenge.
What I'd like to revisit or remind everyone is the grasps framework.
Yeah.
And this is one of my favorite handouts. I think we shared this with you, and I hope you have a copy of this because I think this is very brief, concise, but I think a helpful guide for you to think about grasp framework. But what I want to draw your attention to is this first aspect of the grasp framework, the goal. So any activity that we do that requires interaction, of course, you need to have a goal. And sometimes this is the hardest thing to come up with. Like, what's the goal of this activity? And what we mean by this is how do you frame the activity? That is, how do you present this to the students? And this is why I keep asking you questions, because I understand that you understand the problem. But what I'm curious about is how you communicate the problem in a way that maybe a novice or a student might not know immediately what the answer is, because what's the point of presenting a problem if they already know the answer, if they've already had that expertise? So usually if we're going to present a problem before the event, we're going to assume that the students don't quite fully understand either the problem and or the solution and or how to the process of getting it, right? Because that is the learning process. So here, there are some different options, and you mentioned problem-based because we haven't talked a lot about problem-based learning, but problem-based learning I feel is a very good approach. Maybe it doesn't work all the time, right? Maybe it's not something you do all semester, but certainly a problem-based learning approach is a very good approach to implement to some degree with your students. So they even have a prompt here. So imagine you were going to say these words in English to your students, maybe at the beginning of an activity, and you might say, the problem is this, or the challenge is this. We're given this context, we need to make concentrated orange juice. There's not a lot of money. The company doesn't have, it's a scenario, it's a problem you're creating, probably from maybe a real life situation. But you say, okay, there's not a lot of money, nutrition is important, and we need to make this concentrated orange juice because because oranges aren't prevalent in this area or whatever. You present the problem. Okay, so it has to be cheap, but it also has to be nutritious. Has to be doable. There's no oranges. Okay, so they have all these problems here that they have to try to bring together. And that's kind of what I'm after about this problem. Now, Do you set, as the instructor, the expert, do you set the problem, do you present it? Or do the students set the problem themselves? And that totally depends on the students, the course, it depends on a lot of things, right? But what I want to share with you guys is to keep an open mind and acknowledging that students also can set the problem. Forget about trying to solve it yet. Forget about the process for solving it. It's this problem, getting the problem right is important. Whether it comes from you, the instructor, the expert, and or comes from the student. So we need to get the problem right at the end of the day. But what I want to share with you guys is to think about, okay, do I set the problem, or do I negotiate it with the students, or do I just say, okay, you guys, what is the problem? And from that discussion, you reach a decision, say, oh, okay, so that we just discussed it, so we all agree this is the problem, okay. Then you go to the next step about process or probable solutions and so on.
And the way of presentation, because it's
All
also a
of those
problem.
things, exactly, all of those things. But what I'm going back to here is the goal. What is the goal of this activity, of this interaction? This week we're focusing on interaction, but we started today's discussion talking about problem-based learning, right?
Yeah.
And thinking about it as 3 steps, and not necessarily in this order. Problem setting, not problem solving, problem setting. That is reformulating the problem or getting the problem. Number 2, the process. How do we go about working either towards a solution, or if there is a solution? And then finally, the last would be the solution or possible solutions. So the actual, and then we could talk about a product or what that might look like, right? And so this is what I want us to think about. I hope we have an opportunity to talk more about problem-based learning in different contexts, in your own context, because I think it's one of those things we haven't talked a lot about, but it's very much relevant, I think, to tying everything together that we've been discussing. And there's so many, it's a complex thing, right? It's like we've spent, almost a half an hour talking about your case, about, okay, thinking about how to present it. Not because, of course, you understand the problem, but is how do we as the experts present this problem, or how could we have them explore the problem, and that's what this is about. So does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I really love to work with that strategy because, well, for us, it's very practical. Because it's what we will see all our life. I mean, patient, and each patient is a clinical case, and each patient is a problem. So you need to find a solution. So that's
sometimes it's a life or death problem. And I think all of us in our individual fields, in some way, right, can identify, because that is what life is about, right? We have limited resources, and we have to produce things.
And another aspect is that in the past, people build or use some solutions, and some other are in place now. But maybe in the future we need to search a better solutions, because for this particular case, now we know that some companies build a mixed process solution with thermal concentration and centrifugation, and they say that consumers are unable to differentiate between a raw use and a reconcentrated use. Consumers statistically don't see the difference. And the most of the orange juice beverage on the market is very different from a raw juice. It's not the same.
There's a problem.
The only thing that seems the same is color. But
sometimes
is your orange juice. But the idea is to have more nutritious, and at the same time in a competitive way.
And a lot of times it's going to be our job to guide, because there are going to be so many problems, right?
Yeah.
We're going to have to guide the students to make sure that the problem, of course, is really related to the objectives, right, of that activity or the course, right? So because otherwise, right, we could be talking about all kinds of different problems.
And that's the idea of why we discuss with the brainstorming discussion outside the group what that means a problem, because you have a situation, the certainty problem is the conditions where you are, and you fix a desirable in the problem.
I'm sorry, you fix the...
You fix what is the ideal situation, what do you want, where do you want to go?
Expectation.
like the gap
Yeah.
between
Yeah.
the ideal and where
But
you are.
sometimes it's impossible to arrive to the
Right.
ideal. And you need to restate the problem and to
Or even work towards
yeah.
a problem. Maybe it's not the solution, but you're working towards a problem to better understand the problem.
Maybe your ideal is a Ferrari, but you don't have a Ferrari, you have a Jetta.
Yeah.
Or a small variety.
Or a small, or a toy.
Also, I think that when the students start learning this way, they see that you are teaching practical things, not just theoretical.
Yeah.
And that's very important for the engagement of the students in the rest of the course.
Yeah, because if at some point they don't get the problem right, if they never really get the problem, again, the problem could be at the beginning, which I think is helpful, but it could also happen at the end. You could say, all right, we're going to do this experiment. We don't know why we're doing it. We don't know what I want you to do it. And they start working, and wait, well, cost, okay, well, nutrition, whatever. So then all these problems come up. So either way, right? But at some point, they see the relationship between the problem, the process, and the actual either solution or possible solutions there.
Like yesterday's experiment.
Yes. So how
You
was
were
that?
recording.
The problem. Yeah. Everything was recorded. Yeah.
We saw you down there.
You guys are smart. I knew you guys knew I was going to be smart.
And you know, also, when you present a problem to the students, they realize that they can work in different, from different perspectives in the same problem.
Yeah.
So there are like multidisciplinary teams that they can give several or different perspectives to solve that problem, and that's very interesting. And then now they have like a group just of professors that are dedicated and devoted to solve complex problems.
Yeah.
So they for example present a problem related to health, like cancer, but there are physics, engineers, MDs, lawyers, lawyers, and they give it different perspectives.
That's a good point. Is yeah. I'm sorry.
Every time this kind of multidisciplinary teams are working better to solve a problem. So for example, the economists see
And that's the idea,
impact.
the idea
Brainstorming.
why it's interesting that they work in team, because they have different perspectives. Yeah, and for complex problems, we know that it's a good strategy to work with multidisciplinary approach.
Alex, you want to add something?
Yes. About the reflection, about the interaction, how can we state questions to help the students to understand the problem we present, or what kind of questions, how can we guide the students to identify the problem? And you say maybe you're going to see the problem from the legal point of view, the point of view. How can we present or develop an activity or performance task in order to interact and to make the student interact in this way, find the problem or to understand the problem during mistake?
What I do is I uploaded the clinical case to Moodle, right? So all the students can read the problem. But in the same Moodle, I start a forum, and to start the forum, I post like 2 or 3 questions towards the direction that I want the problem to be solved. You know what I mean? And they start answering, one student, another, and interaction is not just from teacher to the student, also from student to student, because they start arguing or discussing the problem, and then they start also interacting with them.
I'm sorry, is your question about how to present questions for students to help identify the problem or to identify the solution?
No, to understand the problem or identify the problem, because
Are you,
yeah,
because those are 2 things.
yeah, not the solution, not thinking the solution.
Okay, but to understand the problem is to understand the possible solution.
Yeah.
For me, personally, and so I think both questions are very good. I just want to be clear in our discussion which one we want to talk about first. How do we present questions to identify the problem? I see that as one thing. And then how do we set up questions to identify either understanding the problem or a possible solution? So can we talk about the identify the problem? Can we talk about just that first? Like how we could set up questions to identify a particular problem, because I think is a good question to ask and a difficult. Anyone have some thoughts?
Well, for example, in my case, we work with comparison in legal situations. So most of the students try to contrast different law. I mean, like law in Mexico, law in US. But first of all, I ask them, okay, you are contrasting 2 kinds of sources of law. But what's the reason of the existence of this law that you're contrasting? What is the problem that emerges, which makes the law to emerge, to be solved? For example, if you talk about same-sex marriage, what are the situations around a person that is living with another person, it happens to be same-sex? And it's prohibited. No, it's not prohibited. I mean, it's not allowed yet. Or what happens if they have a social security? What happens if they have what happens if one of them has a child? What happens? I mean, all the situations around a single topic. So they don't get to only check if what the law says in Mexico, what the law says in the US, or maybe a sentence. So I ask, like in a Socratic way, I try to make them reflect about the problem around the law. So that's the way I try to make them understand that if they are going to analyze a legal precept, they have to understand what's in the background. Because we have many laws. Too many.
Historical.
Yeah. What happens in the social situation? What happens in the economic situation? What happens in the... So they have to understand what comes in the background of the law. So I ask them, okay, so what happens if, okay, you said that, and now, what kind of procedures do you have to follow to do this? So they have to reflect about the problem. So when they analyze the law, they have a different, or maybe I think that's scaffolding. They are linking information about what they have to search for. That's the way I try. I ask a lot of questions. I think that's important.
So I raise the question depending on the how do you say, I raise the question depending on the focus that I want to give to the problem. For example, if I have the example of Ramon and then I have the problem with orange juice, okay, there are several topics around the problem. So it depends if I want to focus my students in the nutrition, on the nutritive aspect of the problem, or it depends if the economical impact of the problem. I mean, I raise the question depending on the topic that I want to pay attention, and my students pay attention to that topic. So depending on for example, in a patient, okay, I want them to discuss, for example, the epidemiological aspect, how will impact this infectious disease to many patients. Okay? So maybe I will raise one or two questions related to that topic. So they get the focus to that aspect. If I'm interested in discussing more the treatment, for example, I will raise 2 or 3 questions concerning the treatment of the patient. So it depends on in what aspect I want them to pay attention.
Yeah.
Because the problem may have different topics, you know. So
again, you have to fix the problem. I mean, you're fixing what's the problem or the approach to the problem to be solved.
yeah, but I mean, for example, for us, the most important is to give like a good diagnosis and a good treatment, so the patient gets well. But I can discuss with one problem, just maybe how the patient got sick, and the pathophysiological aspect, and not just the treatment.
To charge a lot.
No, but I think that there's a key point, because I remember in 70s, some agricultural schools of Sinaloa say, if we want to know the agricultural problems, we need to take the students and go with the producers and the social and to know what is the problem. And they began to do that, and they arrived to the conclusion that the problem is not technical, the problem is social. And they go to do social, they did social movements, but they forget that the mission is to study the technical problems, not the social problems. That's another problem, because you need to know that technical problems are influenced by social problems, but maybe it's not your problem because it's another problem. You need to know only that affects. But if your mission is to study the law, you need to concentrate on the target. Because if you identify another problematic situation, you don't know when you do.
I don't understand the last part.
But then I want to say that you are a program, you are goals or objectives of the program, you need to concentrate on this aspect. And all other aspects are support to to arrive to your abilities. Because if you begin to study all the situations, maybe you forget your mission or the main task. I understood that your comment that you need to.
I mean, for me, I use a lot the problem solving technique because it's like how do you say it's like pretextual.
Well, it provides a reason,
It's
a
provides a
reason,
reason
a purpose.
to discuss whatever.
Okay.
The patient I can discuss from the molecular aspect of the disease to the technical aspect of the surgery. So it's a really broad technique to discuss whatever I want. And that's the beauty of the problem solving.
Yeah, it's the why.
Yeah.
It's the why. Why do I need to know about molecular or this and that, or whatever it is? Well, because I need to be able to help someone with a particular illness. It provides a reason.
And it's not specific. So as it's a general problem, you can choose to raise the question about one or another aspect of the same main problem. So
And the problem can also lead to more specific problems. It can be very, very, very specific from a general problem.
and sorry.
So maybe thinking about this question, you know, I can ask the student, okay, I got this idea, for example. So how can we improve this question? So maybe let's say, okay, thinking about the legal stuff, I think the problem is right here.
Yeah.
So because there is no, the brand is no registered, maybe like that. And then how can we guide to this question?
What specific?
How can we guide to this question to the students propose essential question in order to realize what is the problem? As you say, maybe with these ideas from different point of view, we get okay. We are going to specify this problem, and then we propose how to solve the problem.
Yeah, can I interject here? I think there are two things going on in your questioning, and I just want to parse these out. I'm going to separate these two. One, when we use the word essential question, for me, I want to be kind of specific what I mean by essential question. I don't want to try to use it too often because, as we've talked about today, questions can be all kinds of questions, right? And some are going to be essential questions and some are not going to be essential questions. For me, when I think about essential questions, I always go back to week 1 or week 2, whatever week it was, when we talked about the objectives. And if you remember, there are 4 key things that we talked about in those goals. The first, the most general understandings. Learners will understand that making concentrated orange juice depends on cost. There's a cost nutritional dynamic or correlation or whatever. Second, the essential questions are the questions that prompt the understandings. That is, it's still at the level of the understanding. Those essential questions are those thinking questions, those how, why, when, where questions. They don't have one answer. They have all kinds of different perspectives that can be discussed. So those essential questions and the understandings are like cousins, right? Or brothers, or whatever analogy. They're close, they're very much related. Then we have below that, more specifically, we have our declarative knowledge or our content objectives, and then we have our skills, our tacit knowledge, and maybe language type of objectives. So that's one thing when we talk about essential questions. And your question is, well, how do we pose essential questions for me, it's still at that level, whether we share it in Moodle, whether we present it, whether it emerges after they do an activity. You could also bring in the essential question and pose it after they've gained some level of knowledge or expertise on something. That's one thing. The second thing I find maybe even more interesting, and I think it's something now that I'd like to try out next week. And that is this idea of questioning sequence, and really we're talking about the Socratic Method. But that we start thinking about the order in which we ask questions. Now, what I don't mean is that we write out every question that we're going to ask in class. And of course, when we're asking questions, I think it might be difficult to be able to recall, oh, what did I ask first? What did I ask second? But what I would like for you to think about, and hopefully either you can do something in your classes, or maybe we can do something in this class. But I want to start by giving an example. We've got just a few minutes left here, right? It's 8:31. All right. I just want to try something, and I'm going to record myself. And I'm going to start a conversation, try to, okay? And let's see how it goes. I'll just say that. So let me record, make sure I'm recording.
So you are recording the recording.
I'm recording the recording so that I can post. Yeah, all right.
That's an obsession.
It is. It's a sick obsession. Okay. What was today's objective?
To discuss about interaction.
Why?
Because we need to learn how to interact better with our students, from teacher to student, from student to student, and maybe from teacher to teacher, so we can learn together, because we are a community of learners.
Okay, so what is a good way of interacting more with your students? What's a...
The interaction of teacher student.
Mhm.
Maybe with split the classroom, create different possibilities of communication inside or outside the classroom.
Anyone else have any ideas about how to increase interaction between teacher and student? If that's a goal of ours.
I think that there's not only way to a fixed way to do it. You have to have the ability and the flexibility to identify along the teaching process which are the best ways to reach the communication in those facets.
All right, think about an example where you had to be flexible in creating this interaction between you and your students. Anyone think of a specific case, maybe a situation where you had to adapt?
Maybe when you post a problem, you can be flexible in the way they're going to give the answer. Maybe written, maybe through the email, maybe in the platform, giving some alternative possibilities.
Have you tried that, Alex? That's a good idea. Have you tried it?
Yeah, no, not yet, but I know that, I mean, when someone forget to upload the assignment in the Moodle, I say, okay, send it to my email or print it and email.
And how do they react to that? Has anyone done, first of all, has anyone done something similar to that with your students? Okay. How do they react? Do they indicate whether that was favorable? Did they like that, or was it, or did you get a negative response from your students?
No, basically, because they thinking about the grade, they
I think that they are relaxed, but they are disorientated sometimes. They feel comfortable with the teaching process or with the interaction, but sometimes they get lost.
And they are not used to different things than a regular class, teacher center, in which the teacher gives all the information on its own. For them, it's like strange or weird to do dynamic things in the class. Well, that's my case. I don't know if you listen for. They are not used to think. That's the problem.
So how much of
just
it?
to listen, and maybe from the listening will be just 10%. What will remain in their minds.
Alright, so how much of this problem of adapting from your student standpoint comes from the input part, that is what they receive, the content, and how much of it relates to the type of interaction that you ask them to do? Do you see the slight difference there?
Yeah, sure.
Alright, so how much of this problem that you're describing here, they're not, something about the class they're not liking, how much of it comes from this input, how they receive the content versus the actual interaction?
Well, I think that it's totally related because you have to, if you want to be flexible, you also have to develop ways of reaching students with the content.
Yeah.
With adapting the materials and all the possibilities that you want to manage in the process. So if you only give them one way, you will get fewer answers or fewer ways of interaction in the process. So I think it's related to the way you deliver the input and how you adapt it.
What's the difference between reaching students, because you mentioned I want that the content reach the students, and what's the difference between that and students interacting with the content? What's the difference?
Well, for me, reaching students is just what is happening in our regular class, right? They just listen what we are telling them. Interacting is, for me, it's a bidirectional way of communication in which the student has an active role. So they do participate, they do respond, they do interact. And for me, interaction is a much deeper way of communication with our students. And I agree with Manuel because it's totally related to our input. We can give them the information, but the problem is that maybe we are also just used to give information like that, and we stop there, and we don't do another activity in which they will apply that knowledge or that input that we give to our students. So that's why actually I'm trying just to give the information online, and my time in class is just to interact with my students in problem solving clinical cases.
All right. So you mentioned bi-directional forms of communication, right? So communication can be one way, can be bi-directional, can be both ways. What would be some more concrete examples, some scenarios where your students in your class have interacted with content in a bi-directional way? So maybe you could talk about how you presented the content, and then this idea of bi-directional.
For example, when you talk about what's the best way to reach a solution, and you're making this dialogue with the student, this interaction about a central topic, and you get both to reach an agreement about something.
To reach a consensus.
Yes.
And so what your example, if I understand you correctly, is one way is through group discussions, one teacher to the whole group. Okay?
Several activities like, for example, think, compare, and share in a problem-solving situation. Jigsaw strategy also for solving a problem. I mean, it's more than dynamic. If I want to interact with my student, should be a strategy that is dynamic, that they can maybe move and get a consensus and then solve the problem.
All right, so both of your examples, I feel, tend to relate to the in-class, face-to-face experience. You mentioned group discussions, you mentioned jigsaw, very concrete examples of think, pair, share. Are there any examples that would also extend this bi-directional type of communication, but beyond the classroom, outside the classroom? Any ideas, Alex or Ramon, like some other ways that you might have create this opportunity for your students?
I think when students talk or write or make a homework or report, or several opportunities that they produce some communications. They if they use the contents and if they use the keywords and they use the methodologies, it's a signal that they interact with the content and with us too, because all these communication opportunities help us to assess or to evaluate what is the content interaction of the students beyond the interaction teacher-student or students-students.
Can you provide some examples of your students sharing that information or that knowledge?
Yeah, because for example, when the students do presentations, we can appreciate if they use the content that we studied the previous part of the course.
Would this happen in class or outside of class?
This one is inside when they do a presentation.
Okay, can you think of an example outside of class, perhaps?
Outside the class? Maybe when they talk with the peers, we can or they can use the contents in their conversations.
All right, and who would be their peers?
What?
Who are their peers?
Their peers are their friends or their colleagues of the same class, or maybe with another, when you have interinstitutional exchange of students, what they are talking about.
All right, and then what evidence would you look for that they did that interaction? How would you know?
It's not easy to know, but if we are attentive, we can catch sometimes that our students speak differently, that they use a more appropriate language.
Are there any ways that, of course I agree, are there any ways in that example that Ramon's shared, which is a very good example, is there a way that he could know could be more sure of those types of activities or those interactions that happen outside? Any suggestions?
Just follow.
Yeah.
Follow your friend, you can track everything, and you can also guide the discussion. So because you will see the answers of the students, the interaction between them, and then you can also participate. And if they get lost, you can redirect the discussion to the place you want. And you have the evidence, and you can track who is interacting and who is not interacting. That's a great book.
Any variations of that using a forum? Now, his context, his students are also part of agricultural types of things, right? So is there anything else beyond the text, the conversations, using even forums? Any other options that you can do?
Maybe like I don't know how the hand
Hangout.
maybe through video.
The use of video.
Yeah.
The use of video, whether it's Hangouts or even a phone. Hey, an interview. Could be an interview video.
And maybe they can go and ask to the expert outside the class and ask for the advice about the topic.
Great example.
They collaborate in a network about a topic.
That's right. You know, the idea of networks, talking to our students about, okay, I made a mistake. Yes. All right, I'm going to stop there. All right.
You missed the question.
I missed the question. See, I could only last about 14 minutes. All right. So what did you notice? What did let me just stop this thing first. Okay. So what did you notice? What did I do just now?
One question raised another.
All right. So I didn't until the very end. I just asked questions. I didn't offer any input, I don't think, until the very end. I'd like to try this with you guys. And I think our discussions went 14 minutes. We've got how many in this class? 1, 2, 3, 4. Who's not here? 5. Jaime and Jose. 3, 4, 5, 6. Anybody else missing today that usually comes? 6. So, what I was thinking, and you let me know here what you think. I'm really curious about. I really like thinking about questions, like recording yourself in class and becoming more aware of your questioning technique, like your approach to this questioning sequence. Now, I just ask a lot of questions. I could not tell you what questions, I mean maybe 1 or 2. I couldn't tell you that many questions that I asked. But I could listen back to it and see if there's any type of logic to the order, or if it was just craziness, okay? But I have the benefit now of going back and listening to that and saying, okay, I asked this question first, then why did I ask the second question? What prompted me to ask the third, and so on, just to kind of have a greater awareness of my questioning technique. So what I'd like to do is have you experience the same, and I think it would be interesting to try to do it in class. I think it would also be interesting if you did it in your own classes, but I think maybe we can do this in class because there's not a lot of us, and I think if we set a time frame and particular topics, I think this is going to be the important thing that we need to think about between now and then is, first of all, how long? What would be a reasonable amount of, because here's what I was thinking. One of us, well, you don't have to stand in the front, you can talk to us, but that you do the same thing, you just ask questions. And, I don't know, I'm thinking 10 minutes? What do you guys think? Is that too, for each person?
For each person.
Because if we have 6 of us, 6 times 10 is 60, that's 1 hour, but that's plenty of time, whether we do it in one day or even if it takes a second day. 10 minutes of question. Now, questioning and answering, so we would answer. And the idea would be to try to pick a topic that is something that I'm going to leave it open, but be thinking carefully about the topic. Something that, of course, you know something about, but also something that we could engage in.
Yeah.
If you get into really the specifics of medicine, it might be difficult. Now, he could go general, where we might be able to answer. So maybe we can try that. Try to link it to your expertise, your area of expertise, but keep it general enough for the layperson, the non-expert, to engage, to follow up with questions. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
And to record ourselves. Like, so you bring your phone, do we all have phones?
Yeah.
I'm just asking, I'm not trying to make it so. Okay, so maybe record ourselves with our phones. It's not really for me, it's more for you, but to go back and listen to how many questions you asked, what kinds of questions you asked, and the order in which you asked those questions. I think it would be an interesting kind of experiment to do. Of course, the idea is to do this in your class. The idea is to try to do it in English, but you might even do it in Spanish just to see what your tendencies are, because the insights I think that you gain in your mother tongue, doing it in Spanish, are going to be very similar to how you do it, not exactly the same, but similar to how you do it in English. Now in English, you're going to have all kinds of other questions like, and that's not the case here because all of you speak well, but when you have students who are really low level, your questioning is going to be like, you know, your questions are going to be more frequent and more specific and more basic until you get to, okay, is it this or this? It's this. Or you even a yes, no. So did this happen or not? And you're going to be working down to those level of questions where the students are going to be saying yes, teacher, or no, because of the limited use. But let's assume now we have fluent speakers here, so we can, I think, use the same experiment to think about different types of questions that we could ask. So I don't know how you guys feel about that. We'll try it. I think it would be interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. And you don't. And the point is not. Don't do what I did. I made a mistake at the very end. I started offering my opinion. So the thing is, the trick is to listen as closely, because this is a listening exercise. Think of it as, you know, English proficiency, practicing our listening comprehension skills, and really, really listen. This is the hardest part, is really listening to them. Because you're looking for, when they say bidirectional, okay, I'm going to ask a question about bidirectional. Right? There are some others. Group discussion. I remember that. I said, okay, I'm going to latch onto that. You're just looking for something to grab onto, to follow up. And then you think about different how questions, why, when, where, with whom, how often.
The idea is to moderate
That's
dialogue,
the roundtable.
To moderate,
topic.
more like a roundtable.
Roundtable.
And that, moderate might be more, it's more like, here's what I would ask that you not do to prepare. Write out questions. Think about that first question, and think about the general topic, and then don't even think of a second question, because it'll even get confusing. Think of it like when you do like interviews for research. This would be like not even a structured, not even a semi-structured. This would be completely open, free interviewing technique, like a focus group. So you just think of that first question, think about the general topic, and then let it go. Don't even think, because once you think of that second question, you're already putting yourself in a box. And you're thinking about that other question, and you're not listening to what's being said. So let's try it. Let's see how we do with it. Let's say 10 minutes. And great. If you have your question, and be thinking about it. You don't write it, don't worry too much about it, but be thinking about it between now and then. Every once in a while, say, okay, what might happen? You could think of theoreticals. What could they answer? And
I use this technique when I ask something and a student says, I don't know. You don't know? Okay.
I don't know how to think.
No.
I don't know what you're talking about, teacher.
So I always tell them, okay, I'm going to help you. You should know something because you know more than you know. Let me help you. Because well, as a lawyer, it could be like an inquisitive exercise, and they feel like getting down in the chest. I'm gonna help you, okay? What do you think about this? Okay, that, okay. If you think this, that. So we reach to some knowledge. I mean, maybe not what I'm asking, maybe not the main objective, but I've proven that they know something. Yeah.
That's an important observation here, is the way that you ask questions. Is it you know, are you putting somebody under the spotlight and really trying to drill them? Are you trying to put them on the spot? Or not? Putting them on the spot is a bad thing, right? Usually it's like, do you know this? Why don't you know this? Right, so so that's another thing to think about, like how can I pose these questions? And maybe some of us answer completely ridiculous answers.